Francis Fukuyama, The Origins of Political Order, From Prehuman Times to the French Revolution. Embark on a fascinating journey through the evolution of political order, as we explore the key themes and ideas behind Francis Fukuyama's captivating book, The Origins of Political Order, From Prehuman Times to the French Revolution. Delve into the complex world of human sociability, understand the pivotal role of kin selection and reciprocal altruism, and marvel at the transformation from tribes and early tribal law to building powerful modern states. Political interactions, religious beliefs, centralization, and the rule of law influence societies around the world. Witness the intriguing contrasts between China, India, the Middle East, and Europe, as we dig deep into the historic foundations that shape contemporary state governance.
Understanding human sociability. Human evolution is made possible by our sociability, our ability to cooperate with others around us. Our natural sociability can be traced to kin selection, which states that we help others according to the percentage of genes we share with them. Reciprocal altruism, on the other hand, means we're kind to people who've been kind to us in the past, even beyond our kinship bounds. As social creatures, we also conform to the rules of groups we belong to, and this process is quite complex and nuanced due to our high intelligence as a species. We developed abstract thinking as our brains evolved, creating theories about our world and giving us a sense of control and understanding. This fostered the creation of transcendent beliefs, which made our social groups more cohesive and gave us something to live for. Eventually, these changes led to the development of politics, where different groups asserted their place in the world. Our group identity is important to us from a biological standpoint, and this has made us the sociable creatures we are today. The evolution of tribes. Humans began settling and growing crops around 10,000 years ago, and this led to the formation of tribes and the earliest forms of justice and property ownership. Justice was defined by family and ancestral connections, and disputes were settled with automatic compensation. As tribes grew, they eventually began to fight wars with each other, but still lacked a central authority to maintain peace or standardized laws. Strong social cohesion helped tribes stay united in times of violence, enabling them to overpower enemies and attain more resources. The Mongol tribes conquered vast territories, but their empire couldn't be sustained due to a lack of centralized authority and clear leadership succession. Today, we can still see traces of tribal law and communal land ownership in some cultures. The birthplace of states. China gave birth to the earliest states, with the formation of 23 separate states in 770 BC. Through a violent unification process, the states merged into one, with legalism taking precedence over Confucianism. Legalism led to the creation of an official class devoted to the state, a centralized power led by Qin Shi Huangdi, and other fundamental changes. Despite Qin's influence, uprisings and protests led to the collapse of his dictatorship, and people returned to the more Confucian structure of previous societies. The early conflict highlights the innate tendency for people to favor their relatives, and the state will continue to oscillate between kin-based and merit-based social systems. India's social and religious roots. India's history of caste system and lack of centralization dates back to the emergence of Brahmanic religion in 900 BC. Over time, society became segmented into castes, and religious leaders gained more power than political leaders, limiting the development of a centralized government. This meant that India lacked a strong military and could not compete with other regions. Despite the efforts of some emperors, political offices remained linked to family ties, and strong institutions were not introduced until the British colonial period. Military slavery and centralization. The Middle East was dominated by two imperial systems, the Mamluks and the Ottomans. To rise to power, these systems perfected military slavery, where boys from various Islamic sultanates were captured and raised as elite soldiers. Prevented from having families, power passed from slave to slave rather than from father to son, which helped the empires to become highly centralized world powers. The Ottomans called these soldier slaves janissaries, mainly taken from Christian families and converted to Islam, who ran not just the army but also the Ottoman state. However, this only partially crushed inheritance and the decline of these empires. The Mamluk Sultanate manipulated the one-generation system by putting their descendants in charge of public institutions like schools or hospitals and allowing some sultans to relax restrictions on families and inheritance. This led to internal confusion and feuding, which the Mongols eventually took advantage of. The Ottomans tried to keep military under civilian control, but relaxed the rules regarding celibacy for janissaries, and eventually, these checks and balances failed, leading to the fall of the empire. How religion broke down tribalism in Europe. The Catholic Church played a crucial role in breaking down tribalism in Europe by implementing social norms that changed the nature of families and property ownership. The Church banned close kin marriage, marriage to widows of dead relatives, adoption, and divorce. Additionally, women were allowed to own property and bequeath it to the Church, which increased its land ownership. Pope Gregory's declaration of the Church's independence from the state led to the Concordat of Worms in 1122, which removed the Holy Roman Emperor's power to choose the Pope. These rulings centralized the state and promoted a religion-based rule of law, which never counterbalanced state power as it did in Western Europe. In contrast, attempts by Islamic and Hindu authorities to implement similar laws collapsed due to a lack of legitimacy and misunderstandings. Legitimacy of authoritarian rule. The book explains how China and Russia managed to maintain a unified state without rule of law and political accountability. It highlights that in China, dynasties derived their legitimacy from the mandate of heaven, while in Russia, the state confiscated property and levied high taxes to make the elites dependent on the state. The lack of unity between non-state social groups, such as nobility and gentry, prevented the fostering of a revolutionary spirit in Russia. The uppermost levels of the Russian state were heavily influenced by family ties and patronage. The book also compares how in Europe, the evolution of various institutions and laws determined if the state became absolutist or accountable to its citizens. Wealthy elites and corrupt monarchs. In 17th-century France and Spain, monarchs raised money for war by selling titles and offices, weakening local elites and judicial courts. The bourgeoisie bought titles to gain power and make it inheritable, while the poor couldn't escape taxes. This corrupt system led to the French Revolution. Spain avoided one and passed family-based favoritism to their colonies, where wealthy settlers became absentee landlords and enslaved the indigenous population, leaving a patrimonial legacy still seen today. England and Hungary, paths to constitutionality. The 1215 Magna Carta marked England's move towards constitutional compromise, while Hungary experienced a similar development 7 years later. However, the two countries' paths towards constitutionalism differed. England was already highly centralized due to the Norman conquests and had laws in place to protect non-elites. Common law enabled tenants to freely buy, sell and lease property without their landlord's permission, and women could own land and make contracts without a male guardian. The English Parliament represented not only the aristocracy and clergy but also townspeople and property owners, and it actively worked to curb corruption. In contrast, Hungarian peasants lacked legal protection and were dominated by the noble estates who didn't grant the king authority to extract adequate taxes for defense. Hungary's Magna Carta, the Golden Bull, merely led to a powerless king and a ruthless oligarchy. The lack of centralization left Hungary vulnerable to attacks from invaders like the Mongols and the Ottomans. While constitutional limits on state power don't automatically produce political freedom, England's centralization allowed for more reforms and greater political stability. The evolution of states. The book discusses how state institutions must constantly adapt to changes in their environment, favoring meritocracy over nepotism. States that defend the status quo to benefit certain elites can enter into a dysfunctional equilibrium that leads to their decline. The path to a stable, inclusive society is through a balance of economic growth, social mobilization, and ideas about legitimacy. Denmark's journey to stability was aided by the Lutheran Church's establishment of schools and encouragement of literacy among peasants. Abolishing serfdom and granting broader voting rights were critical steps in Denmark's successful political development.
The Origins of Political Order investigates what makes a successful state and uncovers that adaptability, meritocracy, and economic growth are critical components of political prosperity. A balance between social mobilization, checks, balances, and societal ideas about legitimacy is essential. Dysfunctional equilibrium, when a state upholds the status quo for a select few and neglects improvements for the whole society, leads to decay. Ultimately, states prosper by learning from history and striking a balance that promotes stability, inclusiveness, and progressive political development. Fukuyama's enlightening book helps us comprehend and appreciate the intricate, multifaceted story of our world's political foundations.